Hello, everyone. Good day. We will be reporting the Republic Act number 9239. Next slide, please. I will be reporting together with Miss Emily Halawig and Mylene Antiporda, and I am Daniel Gale Chua. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the general provisions. Section 1, short title. This act shall be known as the Optical Media Act of 2003. Section 2, policy. It is hereby declared to be the policy of the state to ensure the protection and promotion of intellectual property rights. The unregulated mastering, manufacturing, replication, importation, and exportation of optical media in all forms is inimical to economic growth and public interest. Towards this end, the state shall institute the means to regulate the manufacture, mastering, replication, importation, and exportation of optical media. Section 3, definition of terms. First is the economic zone. The special economic zones, industrial estates, export, processing zones, and free trade zones as defined in Republic Act number 7916 or the TISA law, including the Clark Special Economic Zone, the Cagayan Special Economic Zone, the Zamboanga City Special Economic Zone, the Subic Bay Free Port and other economic zones, now is existence in the Philippines or as may be established in the future. IP Code, Republic Act number 8293, also known as Intellectual Property Code of the Philippines. License, the authority granted by the Optical Media Board, OMB, to establish or entities registered with the OMB to engage in the business of mastering, manufacture, replication, importation, or exportation of optical media, magnetic media, a storage media or device characterized by a base, usually plastic, coated with ferric oxide powder, in which visual and or oral information or software code may be recorded or stored, including but not limited to magnetic tape, cassettes, videotape, diskettes, and floppy disks. Next slide, please. Next is manufacture, the act or business of producing optical media or devices containing sounds and or images or software code, including any work protected in the Part 4 of the IP code, by mastering and or replication. In relation to equipment, manufacture shall refer to the assembly or integration of various components into the equipment useful for the mastering, manufacture, and or replication of optical media. Manufacture equipment, any and all equipment, machine, or device now known or to be known in the future, intended or designed for the production or manufacture, the mastering and or replication of optical media. Optical media masters or production of, including but not limited to those which shall be listed in the implementation rules and regulations or the IRR of this act or as prescribed by the OMB. For the purpose of this act, optical disc, writers, and such other devices used in personal computers not for commercial purposes shall not be considered as manufacturing equipment. Next slide, please. Manufacturing material, any material such as but not limited to optical grade, polycarbonate or polycarbonate substitutes with physical properties suitable for the manufacture of optical media. Mastering, the act or business of producing a sampler made of glass, metal, or other material intended for the manufacture of optical media. Optical media, a storage medium or device in which information, including sounds and or images or software code, has been stored, either by mastering and or replication, which may be accessed and read in using a lens scanning mechanism, employing a high intensity light source such as a laser or any such other means as may be developed in the future. The term shall include, but not limited to, devices which shall be listed in the IRR of this act or as prescribed by the OMB. Next slide, please. The OMB, the Optical Media Board. Replication, the process of manufacturing optical media by reproducing or generating copies of a sampler in an ejection molding machine or other forms of replicating equipment. And last but not least, source identification code or SID code. This is very familiar in the technical world. A system of codes to identify the source of all optical media mastered, manufactured, or replicated by any establishment or entity. Next slide, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Malina Antiporda. So the next that I will be tackle is the optical media boards. So let's proceed to the section 4, which is the reorganization. So the Videogram Regulatory Board, or the VRB, established by Presidential Decree number 1987, is now reformed into the Optical Media Board to carry out the directives and achieve the goals stated in this act. So the next is this section 5, which is the coverage. So in coverage, this is the entire area of the Republic of the Philippines, including the economic zone, as as specified by the Act and Republic Act number 7916, shall fall into the purview of the OMB's power. Next is the section 6, which is the board. So in the board, the OBM will be made up the 5 regular members. So these 5 regular members who will be chosen by the president and 4 ex officio members. The president will choose one of the 5 regular members to serve as chairpersons. So The in the board, so the ex officio members of the board shall be composed of the Secretary of the Department of Trade and Industry or the DTI or his duly authorized representative, and the Secretary of the Department of the Interior Local Government or the DILG, so or his duly authorized representative also, and the next is the Secretary of the Department of Finance or the DOF or his duly authorized representative also. And the last is the Director General of the Intellectual Property Office, which is the IPO, or his duly authorized representative. So provided that the authorized representative shall have a rank not lower than assistant secretary. So the five regular members shall be made up of one representative, just like in the PPT, and also this one representative is from consumer organization and three representative from the private sector, each of whom shall be appointed from a specific industry relying on intellectual property protection, and another one representative from academia, and one representative from consumer organizations. So the regular members must be nominated by associations or organization with national acclaim. So the section 7 is the qualification. So in qualification, the regular members of the board shall be Filipino citizens who are at least 21 years old and good moral standing in the community and who have the most demonstrated competence in the industry that they represent. However, the chairperson shall be at least 35 years old and good moral standing and possess managerial and administrative expertise. Finally, at least two regular members of the board shall be members of the Philippine Bar. So moving on to the section 8, which is the compensation. So in compensation, based on the most recently approved standards government compensation, the chairperson will be paid a salary and the allowances. Next is section 9, which is the meetings. So in meetings, at the call of the chairperson, the board shall have regular meetings at least once a month or more frequently as needed. So to do business, the board's quorum must consist of a majority of its members. So next is the section 10. The section 10, which was the powers and functions of the OMB. So the OMB shall have the following powers and functions. First is create or formulate and implement such policies and programs as are necessary for the accomplishment of the purposes of this act. So next is the evaluate the qualifications of any individual, establishment, or other entity to engage in the mastering, manufacture, or replication of optical media. For this purpose, the OMP shall require such person to substantiate its capability to engage in said activities. Number three is is supervise, regulate, grant, or renew licenses for specific periods, or deny, suspend, or cancel the same, subject to such condition as it may impose for the activities enumerated in Section 13, to conduct inspections of establishments or entities, including those located within economic zones, and engage in the activities described in Section 13, again, the A, B, and C of this Act, on its own or in coordinations with other competent government agencies at any time, with or without prior notice, and use reasonable force if the responsible person or persons of such establishment or entity avoid, obstruct, or refuse the inspection. So the next is the apply for or obtain search warrants from any court of law or take into preventive custody any optical media and material or equipment, including the parts, as the accessories and paraphernalia used for the mastering, manufacture, or application of optical media which are found in any premises if the OMB has reasonable ground to believe or suspect that these are evidence of violation of the provisions of this act. The next is the act as complainant in the criminal prosecution of violators of this act. Next is hear and resolve. So hear and resolve administrative cases against violators of this act and impose administrative sanctions, including but not limited to the impositions of fines and penalties, yes, and confiscation of optical media and suspensions. What else? Non-renewal or cancellations of the license to operate or closure of establishments or entities that violate the provisions of this act. So for this purpose, the board shall have the power to issue subpoena or the subpoena the subpoena this disease, TICOM, to compel the attendance of witnesses and production of documents and other effects. So the next is the call upon law enforcement. So call upon law enforcement agencies and the managing authorities in the economic zones for assistance in the implementation and enforcement of its decisions, the order, the rules and regulations. And next is the deputize. So to deputize, whenever necessary, provincial governors, the city and the municipal mayors, and representatives of the national government agencies or organizations representing copyright owners, neighboring rights owners, and concerned sectors to help monitor compliance with and report to the OMB in evaluation of this act. So, moving on to require persons, establishments, and entities engaged in the activities in Section 13 to keep and maintain for a period of at least 5 years true and complete records of all activities related to the conduct of its business. So for this purpose, the board may at any time require the production of such records and samples of optical media from each mastering, manufacturing, or replicating line. So next is the levy, assess and collect, and periodically adjust or revise the rates of fees and charges for the issuance of licenses granted under this act. Next is the establish support of offices as may be necessary. So next is create and maintain a database and regularly publish data containing the list and activities of registered or licensed optical media and other related establishments. So any enforcement agency, including the Bureau of Customs, so may refer to this database for enforcement and seizure. Next is the prescribe the internal and operational procedures for the exercise of its powers and functions, so the performance of its duties and responsibilities and other related matters. And lastly, the exercise such other powers and functions as may be necessary or indeed incidental to the attainment of the purposes and objectives of this act, and to perform other related duties and responsibilities as may be directed by the president. So section 11. So next is the section 11, the chief executive officers. So the chairperson of the board shall be the chief executive officer or the CEO. The CEO shall exercise the following powers and functions. So first is the implement and oversee the board's orders, resolutions, orders, policies, and rules and regulations. Next is second is to organize the OMB's internal structure and administrative processes and recommend to the board the appointment, the transfer, the detail, the suspension, or removal for good reasons of the administrative and subordinate personnel. Third is the oversee and manage the OMB's internal operations and affairs. Fourth is present a yearly budget to a board for approval. And last is perform any I know the second to the last is to to other board members in compliance with OMB guidelines and regulation delegate all or a portion of the responsibility. And the last is they perform any additional tasks and duties that the board of the president may have approved. So the last section that I'll be discussing is the section 12, which is the OMB secretariat. So the OMB shall have a secretariat or herein created, headed by an executive director who shall assist the chairperson or the CEO in the day-to-day operations of the OMB. So the executive director shall be appointed by the person subject to the approval of the board. His term shall be continuous with the CEO. So next.
Miss Amalu?
Yes, thank you for that, Ms. Manny. Uh, for me, for my discussion for you today, is all about the article number 3. It is all about the licensing and other regulatory provisions. So the question is, how can the government sustain legality in the optical media business? So from the Optical Media Board's perspective, this question, no, which is through registrations and licensing. So in this article, there are 6 sections that are related. First, the section number 13, the registration and licensing. So it tackles there know that any person, establishment, or company must register with the OMB and get the necessary licenses before operating in one or more of the business or even activities. Then through importing, exporting, buying, selling, or distribution of optical media as well as manufacturing tools, supplies, and materials used or intended to be utilized in the replication, creation, or mastering of optical media. Other way, owning, using, or operating manufacturing tools, parts, or accessories, like purchasing, utilizing manufacturing materials for creating, producing, or duplicating. Those mentioned above, no, are licenses issued by the OMB that are conditions precedent for securing the necessary business permits and licenses or registration from the appropriate authorities. And that shall also be necessary for the release of manufacturing equipment, parts, and accessories, also the materials, yeah, intended for use in mastering and or manufacturing of the media. So mind that no that it is very important to have and necessary that registration and license issued by the OMB shall be permanently displayed at designated place business. So here we go for the section 14, that is form, term, amendment, and renewal of license. So each license must be valid for 3 years, subject to any restrictions by the OMB may apply. So upon a request filed by the license, in accordance with this act, so the OMB may follow or change or renew a license. So any permits, licenses, or registrations issued by any national or local government unit, agencies, or office shall automatically expire in the event that the holder does not register with and acquire a license from the OMB. So next, the section 15, it is all about the grounds for new issuance or non-renewal of license. This section, no, it describes that the OMB may refuse to grant a license or to renew a license upon the following grounds, such like if the applicant failed to comply with any requirement imposed by the board pursuant to this act and its implementing rules and regulations. Other way, no, if an applicant or in the case of juridical persons, any of its officers and directors, and managers, shareholders, or even partners, is convicted by final judgment on unoffensive under this act of any law relating to the protection of intellectual property inside. So for the section 6, ground for suspension or cancellation of license. In this section, yes, after notice and hearing, the OMB may suspend or revoke a license on its own initiative or at application of any interested party for any of reason, for any reason of say for example, upon the license holder's request, when the license holder no longer conducts the activities that is specified in the license or at the address or other location specified in the license. So for more details, no, if the license holder has been found guilty of a violation of this act or any other law governing the defense of intellectual property rights, or whenever the license holder violates or is as or is unable to adhere to any of the license requirements. So here we go for the section 17 now. Next and next. In section 17, it is about the registration of persons licenses. So within 30 days of the calendar now of the rules and regulations implementing this act, taking effect that all current establishments or entities operating in the Philippines engaging in activities listed in the section 13 must register with the OMB obtain that required licenses. For the section 18, the source of identification or the SID codes. The OMB shall, for this section now, the OMB shall determine, develop, and or adapt a system of source identification. So, apart from that, the next article, number 4, the penal provisions. So, there are some penalties now. If that business or any activities that are not registered or not licensed, and it's a sequence, a sanction depending on the penalties that are given to that particular issue. So, in section 19, the offenses and penalties. This article now is focusing about determining penalties under the Republic Act 9239. Yes, one of the many stipulated corresponding these penalties now. Of course, imprisonment. Imprisonment of at least 3 years, but not more than 6 years, and a fine of not less than 500,000, but not exceeding 1,500,000, at discretion of the court, shall be imposed of any person, and natural or juridical, who shall, say for instance, use manufacturing equipment, components, or accessories without required OMB or permits import, such like exporting without asking permission, use optical media for manufacturing application, and then um, using application, importing, exporting without required of the OMB authorization. So for number 4, can you next smiling? Okay. The number 4, produce optical media through mastering, manufacturing, or replication without adding the SID code or any other code that the OMB has prescribed or assigned or permitted to the final goods such like any optical material that does not contain the codes prescribed or assigned and authorized by the OMB shall constitute prima facie proof as such violation of this act. Prima facie means based on the first impressions. So for now, number five, produce or duplicate optical media by creating, attaching, or incorporating bogus SID or other codes into the finished goods. The existence of erroneous or illegal codes shall constitute prima facie proof of said optical media's infraction of this act. So number six, no. Okay, use false SID or other codes that have been assigned to another person by the OMB in the mastering, manufacturing, or replication of optical media, or after being given these codes by the OMB and receiving authorization to use them, permit or authorize another person, establishment, or entity to use, affix, or install such codes in the latter's products. So, no, another penalties, no, imprisonment of at least, sorry, the second penalty is, no, of course, imprisonment of at least 1 year, but not more than 3 years, and a fine not less than 100,000 pesos, but not exceeding by 500,000 pesos at the discretion of the court for the following offenses. And these are um, one, when using manufacturing materials used or intended for use in the mastering, production, or replication of optical media without the requisite licenses from the OMB or engaging their importation, exportation, sale, or distribution. Second, when knowingly performing or providing the service of mastering, manufacturing, or duplicating of the optical media to any person in relation to any intellectual property without the owner of the intellectual property or his agents or assigned consent after being licensed by the OMB. Can be next, Ms. Mylene. Okay. For this purpose, no, any person, establishments, or entity that has been granted a license by the OMB to conduct the aforementioned activities shall be deemed to have act in good faith with respect to any transaction that are enters into with respect to the preceding sentence. If he noticed the OMB of such transactions within 5 working days of receiving the orders and provide the OMB with all relevant information. So number three, no, refusing to turn over for preventative custody any optical media, equipment, manufacturing materials, including components, accessories, and paraphernalia discovered during inspection operation to be violation of the provisions of this act, or turning them over for examination by the OMB. For the purposes of this paragraph, no, violators who use armed force again, who use armed force against OMB agents will be face penalties under additional laws that may be enforced in addition to those set forth in this act, and at at the discretion of the court, not less than 25,000 pesos and not more than 50,000 pesos, or imprisonment for at least 30 days, but not more than 90 days. So knowing we know that own products with the same subject matter or title that were made in violation of this act and exploited for the commercial gain, taking part in any other commercial activity using optical material that violates this act, such as selling, renting, distributing, importing, or exporting. Okay, letter B, at the discretion of the court, a fine of not less than 1,500,000 pesos, but not more than 3 million, oh my, may be imposed for repeated violations of Section 19, which carries a standard sentence of 6 years in jail, but not more than 9 years. So letter C, at the discretion of the court, a fine of not less than 500,000 pesos, but not more than 1,500,000 pesos, may be imposed for repeated violations of Section 19, and then in addition to uniform imprisonment for 3 years with maximum term of 6 years. Without limiting the application of appropriate penalties, no, or sanctions provided under the Section 216 and other appropriate sections of the IP Code, Republic Act, number 8792, also known as the Electronic Commerce Act, and then the revised penal code or other applicable laws, the offenses listed under this section shall be punished. So here we go for the section number 20, the determination of penalties. Yeah, the next one is Mylene. Okay, the court, this section, no, the court shall take into account the magnitude or violators' operations, the value of items implicated in the violations, and the time of violation when establishing the number of years of imprisonment, amount of punishment to be imposed. The OMB shall also take into account the aforementioned situations with assessing administrative penalties. So, for the section 21, okay, persons liable. So in this section, if the perpetrator is an alien or shall we say an immigrant, they must be removed as soon as they have completed their sentence and are then prohibited from entering the nation again. If the offender is a government official or employee, they will be permanently barred from holding public office and will no longer allowed to cast about take part in any public elections for 10 years. So okay, for the section 22, the enforcement. Yeah, no, in this section, insofar as such functions are concerned, they shall be subject of the direction and supervision of the OMB, the disposal of seized material. So this section now are getting rid of seized materials. So it was stated there that any optical media, equipment, or materials discovered to have violated the terms of this act, as well as any books, records, or paraphernalia showing that a violation had been committed by any person, establishment, or entity, shall be confiscated and forfeited in the government's favor and disposed of, of in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. So, by provided no that confiscated optical media, any pending consideration of the case be immediately destroyed upon forfeiture. So until the end, the related procedures, the maintained representative sample will stay in custody of the law. So the Bureau of Customs has the authority to seize and immediately dispose of any equipment or materials imported under this act. I think that would be all. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Halawig. So let's move on to the transitory provisions. So let's move on to the section 24. So in the section 24, which is the Videogram Regulatory Board or the VRB and the Secretariat. So in this, until the new chairperson daw and at least a majority of the board have been selected and qualified the current chairperson. So the vice person, members of the board, and the secretariat shall continue to serve their current capacities and receive the respective salaries and benefits. So the current officials and the employees of the VRB shall be given priority in appointment to new positions to which they may be qualified and under the new staffing pattern on the basis of experience, on the basis of what else? On the basis of merit and on the basis of their fitness. So moving on to this section 25, which is the transfer of funds, the assets, the liabilities, and records. So this section is these are all the contracts, the records, the papers, or the real and personal property, the assets and the liabilities of the VRB must all be transferred to the OMB. So and the section 26, which is the regulation of magnet media. So in regulation magnet media, in order to regulate magnetic media, so the requirements of this act shall be applied similarly. So the section 27, which is the classification of motion pictures and cinematographic. Section 27, which is the classification of motion pictures and cinematographic works. So the movie and the television review and classifications board is responsible for determining the audience acceptability. So the this is the responsibility of these sections, that the audience acceptability of motion pictures, the cinematographic works and optical media, and the last is the related publicity materials or the MTRCB. So the last section that I'll be discussing, which is the section 28, which is the prosecution of pending cases. So section 28, the prosecution of pending cases. So yes, for the purpose of this act, all pending cases for violation of Presidential Decree number 1987 shall continue to be prosecuted.
So the miscellaneous provision, section 29, organization structures. The organizational structures and staffing patterns of the OMB shall be established in coordination with the Department of Budget and Management, DBM, and in accordance with the civil service laws, rules, and regulations. Section 30. Period of implementation. The OMB and the DBM shall prepare the necessary work programs to cover the staggered uh, implementations of this act for the period not exceeding 5 years. Section 31. Appropriate. The appropriations for the VRB under the current General Appropriations Act shall be used to carry out the initial implementations of this act. Thereafter, such sums as may be necessary for this implementation shall be included in the General Appropriations Act. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, Section 32, Annual Report. The OMB shall within 90 days after the end of every fiscal year submit to the President and to Congress an annual report on its accomplishments under this act, together with its plans and recommendations to improve and develop its capability to enforce the provisions of this act, and a complete accounting of transactions with respect to the use of income. Section 33, Congressional Oversight Committee on the OMB. The Congressional Oversight Committee on the Optical Media Board shall be composed of the chairs of the Senate Committees on Public Information and Mass Media and Trade and Commerce and the House of the Representatives Committees on Trade and Industry and Public Information, and two members each from the Senate and House of the Representatives who shall be designed by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives, provided that one of the two senators and one of the two House members shall be nominated by the respective minority leaders of the Senate and the House of the Representatives. Section 34, Implementing Rules and Regulations. The OMB shall within 3 months after the effectivity of this act submit to the COC-OMB the implementing rules and regulations, the IRR, governing this act. The COC-OMB shall approve the IRR within 30 days. Section 35, Severability Clause. If for any reasons any provisions of this act is declared invalid or unconstitutional, the other sections or provisions not as declared shall remain in full force and effect. Section 36, Repealing Clause. Presidential Decree number 1987 is hereby repealed. Presidential Decree number 1986 or the MPRCB law and other laws, rules, regulations, decrees, executive orders, and other issuance or parts thereof, which are inconsistent with the provisions of this act, are hereby repealed or modified accordingly. Section 37, Effectivity. This act shall effect 15 days after its republication in the official gazette or in at least two newspapers of general circulations. Next slide, please. So this law was approved by the President of the Senate, Mr. Franklin Drilon, and the Speaker of the House of the Representative, Jose de Vinacia Jr. This act, which is consolidated of House Bill number 5225 and Senate Bill number 2586, was finally passed by the House of the Representatives and the Senate on December 17, 2003 and January 13, 2004, respectively. So this was also approved by Secretary of the Senate, Mr. Oscar G. Yabes, a very respectable man. And next is Mr. Shh, and Mr. Secretary General, House of the Representatives, Mr. Roberto P. Nazareno, and this was also approved in February 10, 2004, by the President of the Philippines, Ms. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Thank you, everyone.